what WAZA does is it brings all of our communities around the world together, and we can have conversations within different cultural contexts that you can't do in a regional association. I have been president of our regional association as well, and that's very much Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea. But globally, when WAZA has a conference, we have people from all around the world with all different contexts and all different reasons for doing the work they do. So for me, the global body is the one that can bridge those cultural contexts. We can set standards and guidance about what people should be doing around animal welfare and conservation so that we are trusted partners and leaders in particularly those two areas. And that we can then work with the regional associations to see what does that look like on the ground for the zoos in their cultural context. So some of the things I've been involved in was when we wrote the sustainability strategy, protecting our planet. So we used the Sustainable Development Goals to write that strategy, but we tried to make it very useful for people in all cultural contexts. So there's strategies like that around animal welfare, around conservation, around sustainability, around reducing carbon. We do a lot of these guides and strategies for people and that they can use to set strategies and standards in their own zoos. So from a global perspective, I think WAZA can communicate globally on different issues, and we can do that more than the regional associations can, or support the regional associations in terms of what they might want to have a stance on.
Yeah, right. That's really important. I think bridging cultural context is something I'd never considered. And having that trust, the credibility that this represents all partners, all areas, rather than sure that might work in your region, but you don't understand my side. Global animal welfare standards are an important topic, right? Like the way that we treat our animals can vary depending on cultures. So why is it important to have these global standards that are consistent across the board?
Well, I was the chair of the Ethics and Animal Welfare Committee when we finished writing our animal welfare goal. We have these goals that we set for people. So there's the strategies, the guides, and now the goals. So the animal welfare goal was one of the first that we wrote, and that took us a long time to write. It took us about 8 years. With a lot of people putting a lot of effort into it. And we use the 5 domains of animal welfare model that was developed here in New Zealand, actually, by Professor David Mellor and other people at Massey University. And it really is a fantastic model for animal welfare because it looks at 4 physical domains and it also looks at the affective state or the mental domain for animals. So we use that as the basis for the animal welfare goal. So the animal welfare goal transcends cultures because the 5 domains is not a cultural context. It's actually what the animal is experiencing, feeling, thinking. And that doesn't matter whether you're in Africa or Asia or anywhere, the animals are still experiencing those things. So the 5 domains sets the standard with the animal welfare goal. And then the regional associations take that overarching goal and then they apply it to their members in terms of an accrediting process. So they will assess their members about whether or not they've hit the goals within that framework. That's really important because we have to have consistency. We have to be using the latest science to provide consistency to make sure the animals on a global scale across WAZA members are getting the same treatment and the same quality of life. David Mellor always talks about a life worth living, and that's why these goals are very important.
Really curious to know though, with these goals, is it consistent for all species? Or does an invertebrate have the same standards as, say, an elephant?
Does, does. I mean, it's harder to judge some of the things for animals that we may be less familiar with how they might actually be feeling. But you can make some judgments about the physical domains as to what that animal is experiencing in its life. You can make some judgments, a little bit more subjective for an invertebrate than it is for a mammal. You can still assess the animal within that framework.
Yeah, I think it's very important to acknowledge that all sentient beings do have those feelings, whether we're super familiar with them or not, whether it's easy to observe or not, it is still there. And I'm really, really grateful to have that global body. And I just want to address a little bit the elephant in the room because there are still a lot of people who are anti-zoos who misconceive zoos as pure entertainment and, those bad institutions, which WAZA zoos really are not. So how are you tackling this challenge? How are you building a bridge to build understanding and trust?
It's in what we do. It's in our actions. I think there are bad zoos and bad aquariums. I'd be crazy to think that they're not. But no one ever talks about bad museums, do they? And I think the reason they don't is because we're dealing with living beings, so we're under more scrutiny. So it's actually understanding that we are under that scrutiny. So we have an absolute responsibility to act accordingly. So I think there will always be people who will not like zoos for whatever reason. But if you can engage with those people, they can actually respect what you're doing if you're a good zoo. And I had that with our animal welfare committee. I asked someone to come on the animal welfare committee many years ago, and she said, well, I'm not an animal welfare expert. I said, no, but you're our litmus test. You can challenge us if we've got it right. She was on our committee for a number of years, and she said, I've never seen so much science since I was at university. And I said, well, we don't make it up. So again, it's about being transparent, it's about engaging. And you can shift people's view. They may not always think that, they might think the world would be better without zoos. I happen to not believe that myself. I think zoos are becoming more and more important as the world goes on, as long as they're good zoos. But I think it's about engaging, and not everyone's going to agree, but it's about being able to be respected for what you do. And I think if we're not very careful about our standards and about how we are with our animals, then the scrutiny will come. And that's why I always say to people, if you're worried about a zoo or aquarium that you're going to visit, see if they're accredited. See if they are a member of their regional association. See if they're a member of WAZA, and are they accredited? Ask the questions before you go. And people have asked me over the years, they say, oh, I'm traveling so-and-so there. Do you think I should go? Sometimes I say, don't do it. It is about being honest about that and about saying, well, accreditation is your first port of call, making sure they're accredited for animal welfare and making sure that what they do is kosher.
100%, because you can vote with your wallet. And if you truly care, that's what we did when we went overseas into Asia, And just in general, I always look on the website and see if I can see an accreditation. But I just want to address, there's obviously WAZA, but there's also things like regional bodies, and you already mentioned the ZAA before. What's the difference when people are looking on websites? What can I expect if I go to ZAA or something that's ZAA and WAZA? Is it simply the same?
No, it's different. So WAZA is not an accrediting body. WAZA is a body that sets standards, sets strategies, works with regional associations. The regional associations like the Zoo and Aquarium Association Australasia, the American Zoo Association, European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and others, Japanese Association of Zoos and Aquariums, Southeast Asian Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and the list goes on. Those are the accrediting bodies. So they are the ones who take these standards and apply them to their members. Those associations that are doing that are members of WAZA themselves. So they have to go through a process of membership like all people do, like all organisations do. But those associations work very, very closely, and they have seats on WAZA Council, for example. They're on task forces, they're on committees. So those regional associations are heavily involved with the work of WAZA, because often they're the ones who have to do the work. So, for example, the animal welfare goal, they're the ones that have to take this document we've produced and make it real. The conservation goal, the 2030 conservation goal, they're going to be the ones that are going to have to assess their members against the conservation goal for WAZA. So our relationship with them is critical and it's integrated. We talk to them about what this means for them, and sometimes they say it's a lot of work, but then they say, but we'll do it. So it might take us a year or so, but then they can adjust. But without them, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about in terms of a global consistency, it wouldn't happen without those associations. So they are really the first port of call if someone wants to know about accreditation. they're the ones to look for.
So essentially, if I want to go visit a zoo or aquarium that I'm not familiar with, I look out for that on their website, or if it's not on there, I will ask. And then
Yes.
if they have the accreditation, I can go there with a good conscience that they're looking after the animals.
Yep. And it's not all the same. Like, it's not, you might visit Wellington Zoo and then you might visit somewhere else. Won't be the same. But what you will get with an accredited zoo is that they are being assessed. They have to justify what they're doing. So at least you will get that as a basic standard if they're accredited. And then people go beyond that, of course. There's always those who want to, rise above the minimum standard. But it's not even minimum standard, actually, because minimum standard is what government sets. So the associations set higher than that.
That's awesome. That's really good to know. And I think it's a really practical tip for anyone who wants to do it with a good conscience. So what other key challenges wearing your President of WAZA hat are you facing on the global stage, and how are you overcoming them through collaboration?
We do a lot of work with a lot of other global organisations around things like animal trading, wildlife trafficking. These are big, hairy, wicked problems that we face around the world. And it comes back to this idea that animals are commodities, and trying to stop wildlife trafficking, thinking about where people are getting animals from, how are they using them, all of these things. These are big things that we have to grapple with, and WAZA alone can't do that. We have to work with other organisations like CITES and the IUCN and really have joined at the hip positions on these things. I think humans have this really strange, it comes back to what we talked about right at the beginning, this curiosity about animals and this status thing about animals. And the people we know who are doing wildlife trafficking are the same people who are drug running and gun running and people trafficking. But they have less penalty when they traffic animals than if they are caught doing those other things. They can make a lot of money out of it, which is terrible. Working with these other interagency bodies and trying to stop things like wildlife trafficking is a big, big thing that we're going to face into the future, for sure.
So essentially stepping up and giving things a voice that can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and different associations do different programs and processes. Like the European Association ran a community program called the Silent Forest, and that was about Asian forests losing all their birds to wildlife trafficking. So we can actually be a voice in the community that a lot of agencies can't be. So if we can use our voice with our visitors and things like that, then we get a big critical mass of people hearing those messages, working in unison with those other global agencies.
I think being in New Zealand, we are at the bottom of the world. We are this beautiful little landmass separated from so much. And you know that wildlife trafficking, for example, is going on. But until you're in the communities where it's happening, it's easy to think of it something over there. Earlier this year, we were doing a bit of travel and we saw some of this firsthand, and it's really confronting. It's really like I can feel emotions welling up right now talking about it. And I think having a global body is really important for this because it ensures that we're all connected rather than just saying, oh, that's over there, that's their problem. Yeah, and just let's put some judgment on and leave.
And interestingly, we have got trafficking happening in New Zealand. We repatriated some little geckos a few years back from Germany. So it happens even in our little corner of the world, not to the degree it's happening in other parts of the world, but it happens here as well. People have to be very aware of what is happening in the animal space. And I think that, having a joined up position is really important, I think. And as I said, not actually being part of it. Like we go back to the otter cafes. Don't go there. We know that that's wrong, so don't do it.
Totally. And I also think it's a really big message. We are watching worldwide, globally, we are watching, and it's not okay. So obviously, that's something we need to overcome, which leads me to the question, what does success look like for WAZA?
I think for WAZA, it's really being that trusted voice for animal welfare and conservation, really having a voice at the table. The World Conservation Congress is happening as we speak, and WAZA has a voice at that Congress, a very loud voice. And I really think being at the table, being able to talk about our expertise, talk about our standards, talk about what we would like to see happening for wildlife and wild places. And that's success for WAZA, I think, that whole advocacy piece, relationship and partnerships piece, more and more. Our partnerships and advocacy head, he's a lawyer. He's worked for big animal agencies like I4 in the past. He understands some of this legal work. So the work that he's doing is only going to grow. And I think that WAZA will have that very loud voice as we position ourselves against some of these, as I said, wicked problems that we really need to grapple with. I think for success for us would be less animal trafficking, much better accredited zoos. I would even go so far as to shutting down bad zoos. And also, I think just being able to work with people who have the same set of values to actually make lives better for animals and people.
I would love to see no bad zoos anymore, because that would be an amazing message globally as well, being like, let's just put the animals first.
And I just think that, in my view, these organisations will not last because society will not accept them. As you were saying before, Anna, people will vote with their feet. And I think that these organisations will not last because they're not delivering what society wants for animals or for themselves. So I don't think we'll ever be rid of them all, but they certainly will not make the grade to be members of their regional association or WAZA. I remember many years ago, I had to present to a government panel, and the chair of the panel said, "Do you think that all zoos in New Zealand should be members of ZA?" And I said, "No, I do not." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because they don't make the grade." And he said to me, "Good answer." So it's not just about having members for members' sake, it's about having members who play to the standard, who are prepared to accept the standard and actually deliver on that. So those other organisations are never going to make the grade, and they eventually won't be around.